Well, that's it. It finally happened. After more than a decade of development, controversy, ambition, delays, memes, impossible promises, technological breakthroughs, and one of the most passionate communities in gaming history, Star Citizen has officially crossed the $1 billion funding milestone. $1 billion! That number alone is absolutely insane when you think about it. Back in 2012, this entire project started as a relatively modest crowdfunding campaign led by Chris Roberts, a developer many people thought had disappeared from the gaming industry entirely. The original goal was just a few $1 million to create a modern space simulator inspired by classic Wing Commander and Freelancer. Fast forward to today, and Star Citizen has become the largest crowdfunding entertainment project ever created, not just in gaming. Entertainment, period. So in today's video, I thought it would be interesting to go back through the history of Star Citizen's funding journey, looking at the major milestones, the different eras of development, the moments where funding exploded, the moments where people thought the project might collapse, and how we somehow ended up here at $1 billion. And honestly, whether you love Star Citizen or hate it, or simply watch from the sidelines in complete disbelief, reaching this milestone is undeniably historic for the gaming industry. Everything started in October of 2012 when Chris Roberts officially revealed Star Citizen to the world. At the time, the gaming industry was in a different place. Space simulators were practically dead, publishers were extremely risk-averse, and the idea of crowdfunding massive AAA games sounded almost impossible. The original Kickstarter campaign asked for just $500,000. That was the initial goal. Not hundreds of millions, right? Just not even billions, of course, $500,000. But almost immediately, the response from players was explosive. Fans of the classic PC sims had clearly been waiting years for something like this, and the campaign rapidly gained momentum. By the end of the Kickstarter, Star Citizen had raised $6 million between Kickstarter itself and the official website. At the time, this was already considered absolutely massive for crowdfunding. Most people assumed the game would probably release within a few years and with a relatively modest scope. Nobody had any idea what the project was about to become. Once crowdfunding started accelerating, Cloud Imperium Games quickly realized something important. The community was willing to keep funding the project far beyond its original goals. And this is really where Star Citizen transformed from a normal game into something much larger and far more ambitious. Every funding milestone introduced new promises: more ships, more systems, more mechanics, larger planets, FPS gameplay, seamless transitions, dynamic economies, massive multiplayer battles. The list went on and on and on. At first, of course, people were excited. The scope expansion felt revolutionary, but this also meant that there was also a little bit of skepticism that began growing outside the community. Critics started asking whether the project was becoming too ambitious, too realistically complete. The harshest critics even called feature creep. Still, the funding never slowed down, quite the opposite in fact. By 2014, Star Citizen had already crossed $50 million, an almost unimaginable number for a crowdfunding game at that time. And perhaps most importantly, the ship sale model had proven unbelievably successful. Players were not just backing a game anymore, they were investing emotionally into a living project. One of the first major turning points came with the release of Arena Commander. For the first time, players could actually get inside ships, fly around, and experience the flight model directly. And of course, it was limited, there were bugs, many different iterations, it lacked content, but it proved something very important: Star Citizen was real. And this mattered because at that point, accusations of scam projects and vaporware were already becoming common online. Every delay amplified criticism, and many people genuinely believed the game would never materialize into anything playable. Arena Commander somewhat changed the conversation a little. Suddenly players could physically interact with ships that they had purchased a couple of years earlier, and funding continued climbing rapidly afterwards. One of the biggest technological moments in Star Citizen history happened during CitizenCon of 2016. This was when Cloud Imperium Games publicly demonstrated seamless procedural planets for the first time, and honestly, this completely changed how people viewed the project. Before that reveal, many players assumed Star Citizen would mostly consist of landing zones connected by loading screens. Instead, CIG demonstrated entire explorable planets, atmospheric entry, moons, outposts, and seamless transitions from orbit to surface. The demo shocked the community. Even many skeptics admitted it was technically impressive. Funding surged again afterwards because people realized that the project was no longer aiming to be just another space sim, it was attempted to become a full-scale sci-fi universe simulation. By late 2015 and early 2016, Star Citizen officially crossed the $100 million milestone. At that time, that number felt absurd. Entire AAA games from major publishers often cost less than that. And yet, Star Citizen was still technically an alpha. This milestone also marked the beginning of mainstream gaming media paying much closer attention to the project. Some articles praised the ambition, others openly mocked it. Star Citizen became one of the most divisive projects in gaming history. But strangely enough, the controversy itself often fueled even more attention and funding. Every debate, every dramatic article, and there were a lot, every viral argument seemed to bring more people into the community. Bad publicity is good publicity after all, right? Between 2017 and 2020, Star Citizen slowly evolved from a tech demo into something resembling an actual game. Planets expanded, cities started to appear, mining gameplay arrived, trading became more advanced, missions improved, prison gameplay arrived, there were caves, weather systems, medical gameplay, persistence, countless ships entered the universe as well. This was also the era where the community became far more divided internally. Some players were incredibly optimistic, while others became frustrated with the slow progress, bugs, and constant delays. And yet, the funding numbers kept breaking records almost every single year. What made Star Citizen unique was that players were not funding a finished product. There was funding potential, a vision, the idea of what the game could eventually become, and that emotional investment turned out to be unbelievably powerful. For many, Star Citizen is actually more of a passion project than an actual game. The next major technological milestone was server meshing, which came with Alpha 4.0 at the end of 2024. For years, server meshing became almost mythical within the Star Citizen community. It was the technology repeatedly described as necessary for the game's long-term vision to function properly. When static server meshing finally started becoming reality, many backers saw it as proof that some of the project's most impossible technical goals might actually be achievable after all. Combined with systems like Pyro, Nix, persistent entity streaming, crafting, and the combined expansion of Squadron 42, which should release this year, funding entered yet another explosive phase. Even after more than a decade of development, Star Citizen somehow continued growing rather than fading away. That alone is honestly quite remarkable. Of course, we cannot talk about Star Citizen's funding history without talking about ship sales, because realistically, ship pledges became the engine that kept the entire project alive for more than a decade. And honestly, the evolution of those tales is also quite fascinating. In the early years, Cloud Imperium Games sold a huge number of concept ships. Sometimes players were buying little more than JPEGs, concept art, or a vague design document describing ships that would not become flyable for many years, and some are still not flyable. Critics mocked this constantly, and the phrases like selling JPEGs become one of the biggest memes surrounding Star Citizen online. But despite the controversy, the strategy clearly worked. Players were not simply buying ships, they were also funding possibilities. Entire professions, gameplay loops, organizations, fleet fantasies, and future dreams of the game itself. Owning a mining ship meant believing in mining gameplay. Owning a carrier meant believing massive fleet warfare would eventually exist. Owning exploration ships also meant that eventually there will be operation gameplay at some point. And over time, something interesting started happening. Cloud Imperium Games slowly began shifting away from the heavy reliance on pure concept sales and starting prioritizing flyable releases instead. Today, new ship releases are flyable from day one or arrive very close to completion. Instead of selling only dreams years in advance, CIG increasingly focuses on ship players can immediately use inside the Persistent universe. That shift changed the perception of ship sales a little bit. While controversy around expensive pledges still exists, many players now feel more comfortable purchasing ships that they can actually fly immediately rather than waiting half a decade for development. And perhaps nothing illustrates the sheer scale of modern Star Citizen funding better than what happened right before the $1 billion milestone itself. The final push reportedly came during the sale of the Envil Odin, an absolutely enormous capital ship, which costs $5,000. Yes, $5,000 for a virtual spaceship. And yet, players still bought it. Enough of them, in fact, to help push Star Citizen across this historic billion-dollar threshold. Whether you see that as inspiring, insane, or incredible probably depends entirely on your perspective on Star Citizen itself, but either way, it perfectly represents just how unique this project has become within the gaming industry. And so here we are, $1 billion raised by the community. That number represents millions of players across the world who believe enough in this insane project to keep supporting it year after year despite the delays, the bugs, the controversies, the drama, and the endless skepticism. Whether you think Star Citizen is revolutionary or completely absurd, there has genuinely never been another game development story quite like this one. No publisher would have ever greenlit something this ambitious traditionally. No investor would comfortably accept development timelines this long without trying to massively reduce the scope, and yet somehow, through crowdfunding alone, the project survived. And perhaps the craziest part is that Star Citizen is still not finished. In many ways, it is still feeling like it's the beginning of what Cloud Imperium Games ultimately wants to create. So, what does $1 billion actually mean for Star Citizen? Honestly, I think that it proves two things. First, there is clearly still a massive audience for hardcore PC space simulators, and second, the relationship between developers and communities has fundamentally changed over the last decade. Star Citizen succeeded and created something far beyond normal crowdfunding. It created an ecosystem where players continuously fund the development because they feel emotionally connected to the project itself. And of course, there's still plenty of valid criticism. The game remains unfinished, development has taken an extremely long amount of time, bugs can absolutely be brutal sometimes, and many promised features are still missing today. But regardless of where you stand on Star Citizen, crossing $1 billion is undeniably one of the most important moments in gaming history. Anyway guys, let me know what you think in the comment section down below. If you ever imagined back in 2012 that Star Citizen would eventually become a $1 billion project. As an original backer, this actually blows my mind, but hey, let's see if we can reach a second billion before it reaches 1.0, right? Anyway, that is all for today's video. If you enjoyed the content, as always, please don't forget to leave a thumbs up. It really helps the channel a lot. Don't forget to subscribe for more content like this one. I've been the Eradicator, and I'll see you guys in the next one.